and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast where we help you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and round 14 of the AFL season is now consigned to history. And we are 3 rounds down in the 5-round bye stretch, which is no doubt causing chaos for your keeper sides. This is a special episode this week as it is the 20th episode of Finders Keepers. A small milestone, but one I am proud of nonetheless, and very grateful to you listening now for the support and engagement you've given to the podcast. It really does motivate me to keep improving it every single week. So onto the footy, just the 7 games this weekend with the Magpies, Suns, Swans and Tigers on the bye. Some interesting results from the Hawks pinching victory over a wayward Crows on a cold night in Tassie, to the Giants upsetting the reigning champion Lions. But my pick of the week was watching the ever-struggling Kangaroos play some really good footy, but fall just short of the Dockers, whose season may well have been on life support had they not held on. The episode this week will run very similar to the ones coming before it. We start with the things I noticed across the round, and in this segment I'm looking for things like notable role changes that could have an effect on the keeper league world. I'm also looking for different trends and patterns of scoring that can sort of help give us an idea of what's to come next for different players. So I'll start off with Thursday night, where the Saints took on Bulldogs at Marvel and really didn't get anywhere near them. The Doggies put on a clinic. But for the Saints, I thought it was pretty interesting, the Marcus Windhager role. He's gone back to playing as a pure mid in the last 4 or 5 weeks and has been scoring well. But on the weekend, he reminded us how good a tagger he can be. He put a very hard tag on Bontempelli and kept him to one of the lowest scores I reckon I've seen the Bont have. Now, Windhager didn't score much himself, but it does help consolidate his spot at the centre bounces. And I think there will be weeks where he's not tied down to a tagging role so hard that he can get the ball and score pretty well, which he's done recently. That was it for the Saints. For the Doggies, I mean, Bailey Williams had a career-high score of 133. He just did as he pleased up and down that wing. And Tom Liberatore was expected to be at half-back. That's sort of the word we got leading into the game, to help sort of accommodate the return of Treloar. But he, from what I could see, spent majority of the game on the ball, Libba. And I don't know if that's because of how well the Bont tag was going and they had to move him forward. But Liberatore owners who were a little bit concerned after last week's poor score and the talk of this role change, they would have been pretty pleased with the output. He put up a nice 120. But the talk of this game was the return of Sam Darcy. After 6 weeks out with what at the time looked like possibly being a 12-month injury, it was great to see him back. And I think we could have expected, or certainly understood, a pretty rusty return. Not expecting the world from him, but he delivered the world for his owners. He had 19 touches, I think it was 9 marks, kicked a few goals, but I think it was more just watching him. Watching this young forward and the reach that he has, you just need to put the ball on his head and it doesn't matter what defender is on him. It's looking like Darcy's going to mark it. Very exciting, and scored a nice ton as well, which was very cool. On to Friday night, a cold night in Tassie, Hawks in Adelaide, and you know, as a Crows fan, this was a pretty hard watch. I mean, the Crows dominated for most of the night, just couldn't kick the goals. And credit to the Hawks, who were being outplayed, but they found a way and stole the victory at the end by 3 points, which is actually quite interesting. The last 3 games between these sides in Tassie, the margin's been 3 points every time. Anyway, onto the players. Dylan Moore, is he officially back now? 2nd ton in a row. He's hit 80 plus in 4 of his last 5 games. Yeah, I think he's back. And I know in the classic world he's going to be targeted. because he'll be cheap. I just wonder if there was anyone out there who targeted him through this poor first half of the year, really, in a keeper league and was able to pull off a trade, because it's the perfect example of a player who's out of form and you know, it's hard to really pinpoint why, but it does feel like it's short term. And if you could trade in a guy like that at low value and get him for, you know, a really good bargain based on his history, and then he turns it around, I mean, that's the elite way of trading in keeper leagues. He's looking good though. It's very good to see for those owners who would have been a bit nervous. Jarman Impey has had a big couple of weeks now. He was huge in this game, just mopping up everything at half back. And the Hawks' sort of half back options sort of vary, don't they? And obviously Sicily's out, but Impey in this role is very good at fantasy. And I don't know, I feel like we haven't seen it. I think he's been more of a forward in recent times. And I know he's had some challenges with his body. But if he's in this role and it sticks, he's a very nice option, and he may not even be owned across all the leagues. So definitely worth keeping an eye out for him. Henry Huswaite is... I was really excited to see he was returning to the side, and was really interested to see he returning ahead of Cam McKenzie, who was an emergency for this game. So I was really excited to see what Huswaite could do, and it's an interesting one. I mean, on the surface, he just wasn't up to it. But, you know, when I look at the numbers, I mean, he had 49% time on ground in the first quarter, and then 60% in the second quarter. And because it was such a low-scoring affair, he only attended 2 CBAs. So he only got 2 opportunities in that first half to show what he can do at a set of bounce. And then he was subbed at half-time, and in all likelihood will be back in the VFL next week. It's tough on a kid, and I get that the Hawks are a really strong side, but I don't know, why would you recall him to the side and put him back in there only to give him, you know, stuff all time on ground and then hook him at half-time? Anyway, it's done. I don't think we'll see Huswaite at the senior level for a while now. Sam Butler, though, backed up a solid return game last week with another. Scored 77, playing forward and midfield, had plenty of midfield time. Great return, and he's a great option in keeper leagues. Not much for the Crows to be excited about on this night. I mean, they're really quite a low-scoring fantasy side at the moment. It started a few weeks ago with the big win over Sydney, where no Crow scored a ton. And it's kind of continued in the last few weeks, which, obviously is going to impact guys like Sam Berry, who is probably the only one I'm going to talk about from this game. He had the same role he's had the last few weeks, but he put on a very hard and very effective tag on Jai Newcomb, really shut him out of the game until right at the end when Newcomb won the game for them. But Berry as a tagger, it's just good for his job security. Not great for his scoring, because it was the 3rd week in a row he's gone around 60-50. And, that's just not enough, particularly if he's on your field. So I reckon a few people are going to, they'll lose their patience with him. It's been a frustrating few weeks as a Sam Berry well-wisher and owner, in which I am. On to Saturday, Brisbane and GWS. And like I said, it was a real upset, the Giants over the Lions. Really exciting times for GWS, because the number 1 pick from a few years back, Aaron Cadman, has had a huge breakout game. And he's been improving, steadily improving the last, let's say 12, 20 games he's played. And it was a great call. I was watching a game a few weeks ago of the Giants, and he was playing well, Cadman. And the commentator said he's just yet to really take a game by the scruff of the neck. And he did this against Brisbane in Brisbane. Kicked 5 goals, took 13 marks. Huge performance. Does that mean he's, someone to target and jump on in a keeper league? I mean, for sure. There's a whole line of key forwards that are starting to really break out across the comp. And Cadman's certainly one of them. I just wouldn't expect him to be putting up big tons like that every week, or even often. There's still going to be some very low games, but he looks great. And, it takes a few years for the key position guys. Usually a number one draft pick, we see them explode fairly early. It's taken a few years for Cadman, but it's coming, and the Giants have done really well there. Lachie Whitfield, I reckon, dispelled any role fears for his owners. Last few weeks, I know he started a little bit half forward, and it's been a concern, but he just gets the ball wherever he plays. And in this game, he ended up in his usual position down back. He took 12 of the 18 kick-ins and just did as Lachie Whitfield does. Racked up the footy and put up another nice fantasy ton. Harry Rouston is he's a first round pick from the 2022 draft for the Giants. He played 7 games in 2023, had some back issues last year, but had really good numbers in the VFL throughout. He's got his opportunity. This was his second game this year, and after Green and Callahan, he was at the most centre bounces for the Giants in this game. He scored 75, but he was on over 50 at half-time, and I think he showed a lot. I reckon he's going to get a good run in the middle for the Giants, particularly with all their injuries. And, I've talked a little bit about the midfield makeup of GWS and what it's going to look like, and looks like this kid's going to have a go, and he looks pretty good to me. For the Lions, the only thing I really noticed was Levi Ashcroft had his lowest score of the season and his career. And it looks like he may need a rest. He just looked a bit tired. They've got the bye coming up, so they'll probably wait till then. And look, I'm sure there's not a single Levi Ashcroft owner in a keeper league who's worried or concerned that his scoring's tapered off. You've got yourself an absolute jet, and he'll have a break and look good again, and then you've got him for the next 10-15 years of fantasy brilliance. Essendon Geelong was that Saturday twilight, and I reckon the Bombers had a crack early, but geez, Geelong, they are a powerhouse when they get going, and nearly won this one by 100 points. Bailey Smith is starting to get, I want to say, a real piggish look to him. He's got 5 120-plus scores in a row. And if you include a 119, it actually stretches to 7 weeks in a row. So 7 weeks of 119-plus for Baslenka. Absolutely dominating. The number one player in the game, for sure. Jack Martin came into the side last week for the Cats, and he backed up that pretty handy debut last week with a 76 this week, and again playing a pretty friendly role behind the ball. It happened last week, and I mentioned it on the episode, but I wasn't sure how much that would continue. But it happened again, and it looks like a role that is going to stick for Martin at the moment. I mean, you consider that Mitch Duncan, who I'll talk about in a moment, was the sub again. They've got options to play Duncan in that role, and they play him as a sub and gave it to Jack Martin, who's a good user of the footy, and I think he's a pretty good option with his forward status. Mitch Duncan, as I said, was the starting sub again, and I just wonder what that means for him. He's been the sub a few times now. It looks like that's probably a likely spot for him, but Sam DeConning got injured, and I think I saw today it's looking about five weeks maybe. Now, when he went down the game, it sent Blitzarves back to cover that spot, and then Duncan came on the field to play on the wing. So I don't know what the Cats do. Does that mean Duncan avoids the sub for a little bit to play on the wing? Not sure. All I know is if you've got him, just be careful and loophole him at every opportunity you can, because if you play in a comp that doesn't have your rolling lockout, like the Shiva League, that's a single season draft comp that I'm in, and I've got Duncan. If he's a sub on a Saturday twilight, well, like he was this week, you can't change your team after the first Saturday game. So just be very careful with Duncan. For Essendon, Will Setterfield has had a really good year, and this was the biggest score he's put out. Huge score, thanks to 10 tackles chasing Bailey Smith around. Now, I heard he ran with Smith. You couldn't imagine he tagged him, because Smith, he racked up over 40 touches. But it looked like Setterfield was minding him, I guess. Anyway, he's looking great for the Bombers. I think his role's pretty set, Setterfield, and his scoring's been... Well, it's been pretty unreal, really. I think there was a 65, and maybe last week was under 80, but every other week it's 90 plus, and now he's putting up some ceiling scores. It's a good option. Zach Merritt returned to being a pure mid this week, which was good news, I guess, for owners, but he did have to deal with a Ocean Mullen tag from the Cats, and in the end, Merritt, well, he saved his score in the end. With a 94 he got to in the end. He just needs a game, playing midfield without that hard tag, and I reckon he'll get his form back. They've got the Dockers this week. Wagner can do the role. It shouldn't be as tight a leash around him we've seen the last 2 weeks, so maybe he can have a good game this week heading into the bye in round 16. Zach Johnson, third game of footy, looked pretty good with his first fantasy ton. He took the most kick-ins for Essendon, and just sort of did as he pleased in that rebounding role that we thought he might be destined for when they called him up to the side a few weeks ago from the VFL, and it was pretty enjoyable. If you jumped on early, you'll be very happy. North Melbourne and Fremantle, this was another home WA game for the Kangaroos. 2 weeks in a row they've done that, and as I said before, they played really well, and Freo did what they had to get the win, but I think North showed some good signs. But it is with Freo I start, because we have the Finders Keepers Player of the Week for round 14, none other than Caleb Sarong, with his 36 touches, made up of 19 kicks and 17 handballs, 10 tackles and a goal for a lovely 146. And it's been quite a while since he's put up a big score, and owners would be forgiven for starting to wonder if we'd ever see a big ceiling whopper from him again. I'm not sure if anything's changed. It just was the perfect game for him. It's not that uncommon for him to rack up, mid-30 touches, but just doesn't take enough marks or lay enough tackles to get that big score. So on a night where he had 10 tackles, it happened. So happy days for Sarong owners indeed. Not so happy days for Neil Erasmus, who has had a good few weeks, been given a role, given a chance in his preferred role on the ball. And look, he was subbed in the second half, and it's kind of like my begrudging of what the Hawks did with Hustwaite, in that Erasmus had 55% time on ground in the first quarter, 65% in the second, and then out of the game in the third. Now, they did bring on Nat Fyfe, pretty handy sub, so there's certainly no shame being hooked when a two-time Brownlow medalist is taking your spot. But I really fear for Erasmus and his Freo days, as I really felt like this was the last chance for him to, look, not necessarily establish himself as a permanent pure mid. I mean, this is a side with a very good midfield already. But for him to be subbed, I just wonder if like Hustwaite, he's back in the twos for a prolonged period. For North Melbourne, Colby McKercher, I was really looking forward to watching as an owner, and hearing about the role change last week. I was pretty certain the role would stay, that, half-back distributor role. And yeah, it was. He took the most kick-ins for North, had another 27 touches. I think 24 of them were kicks, which is what you want to see. Only a couple of marks, but yeah, really good signs. And he was doing some really good things that you want to see for a player in fantasy, taking kick-ins and then, sprinting for the handball receive, then kicking it long, nice double possession play. Yeah, all the stuff you want to see. So hopefully North keep him there and he can continue to accumulate and deliver for his owners. Riley Hardiman really does look to have lost that nice role he had a few weeks ago that was pretty exciting, particularly when he scored a ton. But yeah, like I said, that distribution role's been absolutely removed from him, it seems. He played on Frederick for the Dockers and kept him really quiet. So he's playing a role, and I think job security is pretty strong still. It's probably more a case of owners, hold on to him because he's got a fantasy game in him. It just might be a while before we see him released into that role more permanently. And then lastly, Luke Davies-Uniacke, who I find him one of the most, puzzling. I don't understand why he's not an absolute gun, by now. And I know he plays at a side that, struggled. And, he's certainly a great player. But just in the fantasy world, he could do anything. He can put on points like anyone. He's 26 now, and, his best season was a 97 average, which is fine, don't get me wrong. I just feel like he could do so much more. And in this game, he looked $1 million in that first quarter. I was just watching him thinking, God, this guy's good. I want to see more of this. He had 14 touches and a goal in that first quarter. And then Freo threw Wagner to him to sort of run with and lock him down. And, LDU only managed 36 points after quarter time. So in the end, what does he score? Like a 74. It's just, I don't get it. I'd love to see some consistency out of him. On to Sunday, yes. 2 games on the Sunday. Port Adelaide took on Melbourne, and this was pretty close at three-quarter time. I tuned in for the last quarter, but Port did what they had to push on and get the win. I was really interesting at selection for the Power because they named up Jordan Sweet, the returning ruckman, but I didn't think he'd make the squad. And then Friday Arvo, yeah, he did. So they ran with Jordan Sweet and Dante Vicentini up against the big Max Gawn, which, was a pretty viable strategy. It would take 2 men to take Gawn down, I would have thought. I was just really interested to see how it played out. So the double ruck setup was in place. Around the ground for ruck contests, it was, pretty much smack bang 50-50. But in terms of CBAs, the centre bouncers, Sweet just took a few more than Vicentini. And I don't know. I didn't watch the whole game, and Gawn was obviously influential as he always is. But Port got the win, and I think they might roll with the 2 again next week. Actually, they're against Sydney, so they'll be up against Grundy, who before the bye was in insane form. So it makes sense to see them go with the 2 again this week. Miles Bergman, another good game in that midfield sort of tagging role where he just follows the player everywhere. He followed Petrarca around. When Petrarca was on the ball, that's where Bergman was. When Petrarca went forward, he went and played a defensive role on him. So it was another ton for Bergman. He continues his scoring run, but he kept Petrarca to 17 touches. So, this is working. And, maybe I stop talking about Bergman because I do every week, but I like what they're doing with him, and I really rate it. For Melbourne, just a couple. Trent Rivers had a pretty weird, quiet game. He didn't look to be playing midfield. I don't think he had any centre bounces, and he wasn't really finding the ball anywhere. The heat map I looked at suggests he was forward of centre a fair bit. So I'm not sure if he had a different role than, he's either that half-back rebounder or on the ball. I wonder if this week they were trying something different with him. But anyway, whatever they were doing, it wasn't working. He was pretty uninvolved. And then he got subbed in the fourth quarter, which I figured had to have been an injury, but it was tactical. So a bit of a concern there. Let's see what happens next week. And then just the other guy, Blake Howes, who is someone that, can't remember if it was last year, the year before, had come into the side, debuted and looked all right, but feel like we haven't seen him for a while. He's been in, I think, the last few games maybe. But anyway, on the day, guys like Salem, Jad McVee were really quiet. Rivers was nowhere. But Howes had a pretty nice game at halfback. And he laid 6 tackles, which I thought was pretty good for that role. And I think he scored, 85, 86. So, yeah, I don't know. Let's see what happens with him. But hard to say if that's one out of the box or not with Howes. And then the last game, West Coast and Carlton on Sunday night. Love my Sunday night footy. And, look, Carlton, it was a weird game, actually. Carlton touched them up in the first quarter, and it looked pretty much all over. And it was, but West Coast, I don't know, they just kept chipping away. But we're never going to catch the Blues. And, yeah, lost convincingly. Anyway, I found this to be a thoroughly interesting game of footy because of the fantasy and the keeper league implications, and there were plenty. And I start with Tom McCarthy, the mid-season draft #1 pick from just a few weeks ago, debuted for West Coast, and it was everything we were promised and more in that plum halfback role. He had 31 disposals, which is the most ever by a West Coast player on debut. He took 10 kick-ins, the most of any Eagle, and played on 100% of the time. So this guy knows what we want in the fantasy world. Incredible debut, and it got me thinking, 31 touches, has anyone done better than that in recent times? Didn't take me very long to go back to Harry Sheasel in 2023 for North. Debuted against West Coast with 34 disposals, which was the most in the AFL era. I know that. I think in the early 80s, I think it was Greg Williams had 38 on debut. But in the AFL era, Sheasel's got the record, 34. Then go back to 2010, round 1, Michael Barlow for Fremantle. Debuted against Adelaide with 33 touches, and I remember this game so well because Adelaide were terrible and bloody BT would not shut up about Michael Barlow getting it. He's got it again! Anyway, that was 15 years ago. Probably time to move on, Jordan. Jacob Hopper is the other one. 2016 debuted for the Giants against Gold Coast, and he had 32 touches. So there's a few names that Tom McCarthy has joined in recent years. Big debuts. Very exciting. Also exciting, Harley Reid had the most touches he's had in a game this year with 28, and it was the second highest fantasy score in his career across the 2 seasons with a 91. He played his usual midfield, bit of forward time, but he was all over the ground. He was everywhere. Quite a good game from him. 4 frees against, that is still hurting him. It's hurting him as a player, and it's bloody hurting his fantasy scores when he's constantly giving away free kicks. So another 4 against, if he'd been a squeaky clean and not given any away, he scores his first fantasy ton. So he's getting there. Now, Tyrell Dewar had a role change recently, a few weeks ago. He was moved to the half-back line, and that's what pushed poor Marek up the ground, and his scoring has suffered. Now, if you grabbed Dewar last week or the week before when you saw the role change but didn't wait for the big score, you're playing this game very well. It's an absolute art to it. Identifying a role change and then grabbing that player before there's a spike in scoring. Because if you grabbed him last week, a few weeks ago, you've got him now. But after this performance, I promise you, everyone will be reaching for him on the waivers. So as I said, he's in the half-back role. He didn't take any kick-ins. Tom McCarthy wouldn't give up any to anyone. But Dewar had 27 touches and 24 of them were kicks. He took 9 marks. And it was such a well-rounded game from him. If you look at his quarter-by-quarter splits, it's not like he's had a massive couple of quarters and a quiet one. He's pretty much scored around 30 points in every quarter and landed on well, just short of 120, 115 I think it was. But yeah, very exciting, great result. Can he back it up? That'll be the question, but I think the role is enough for owners to be pretty excited. Clay Hall came on in the third quarter as a sub, played on ball, had 9 touches, looked really hard at it. I like the look of him. He's in his second year now, and we haven't seen him since round 5, but yeah, that was a good little audition, just coming on in the third, and I think we'll see him a little bit more in the coming weeks. He looks like a good player. For Carlton, they had some big injury news over the weekend, which, you know, could potentially have all sorts of knock-on effects, looking at it from a keeper league perspective. But I'm sure you're aware by now, Sam Walsh had a hot spot detected in his foot at training, I think on Friday. They've checked it out, and he's now out for about 5 to 6 weeks, I think. So once that news broke, my first thought was Cooper Lord, who is someone that has got more than 1 or 2 mentions on this podcast this year, purely for the fact that even in the games he was a sub, every time he was on, his points per minute were great and he just scored. Now, there were a few games early in the year where he had some CBAs, and I liked the look of it, but since then he's really been shunted out to the wing. But this week, with Walsh out, Lord did pick up a bunch of centre bounces, and so did Jesse Motlop, who they like in there for a bit of point of difference. Now, for the game he played, Lord, I mean, he didn't get a lot of the ball. He laid 8 tackles, which shows the intent. Wasn't his best game, but I just hope they persevere with him, because I think he's going to be a really good player and a good scorer, particularly if he gets plenty of time on the ball. Now, the guy that actually came in for Walsh was Jackson Binns, a guy who's been around, I think, a couple of years now, really good numbers in the VFL. He came in and really just took the Cooper Lord spot on the wing, and I thought he looked pretty decent. 26 touches, with 21 of them being kicks. Nice little ratio there, and that helped him on the way to an 89. So I think he's pretty safe in that role. He looked good to me. Let's see if they persevere with him. I think he's, certainly an option, someone to keep an eye on. Mitch McGovern played forward again this week, and yeah, I really liked it. I've spoken about in the past that I've never understood why McGovern went from a gun forward at Adelaide to a rebound interceptor at Carlton. But that's a couple of weeks in a row they've played him forward, and I just think he looked really good in the role. He kicked 3 goals, scored 81. His hands just looked really good. He's such a great marker of the ball. Now, Charlie Curnow went off. I reckon it was pretty precautionary. I feel like he'll be okay. But I did read today, I think Mackay might miss again. So McGovern has to stay forward, I reckon, and he will. And they've got North this week. So, you know, he's an opportunity there for him to put in another good performance, kick a few goals on that young, you know, undermanned North defence that they have at the moment. And then lastly, Sam Docherty. There's a lot of talk about him, particularly in the classic world, with that half-back role returning in recent weeks, which has been very fruitful, scoring back-to-back 112s. Then when Walsh was out, there was a lot of conjecture over whether or not we'd see him pushed into the midfield instead of the half-back role, which I think would have been fine. I think he can score in either role. It's just if he ever gets stuck back on the wing, that's when, you know, his scoring really dries up. But as it turned out, no, he was still very much on the half-back line. He just didn't see a lot of the ball. He just had a quiet one. So he scored 71, I think it was. And, it just wasn't his day. I think for owners, he's still someone to be excited about for the run into finals if you're contending. One, I think that role stays and he'll score better than that next week. And 2, the potential for him to pick up defender status before the year's out is very, very likely based on the last few weeks. All right, let's have a look at the top waiver wire pickups for this week. Before we look at last week's picks and how they fared, don't forget that you can find Finders Keepers on X at FindKeepAFL. find the page, give it a like, and don't forget to send in your Keeper League questions, or even better, send me trades that have gone down in your Keeper League that you want me to evaluate, and I'll read them out on the podcast and give you my thoughts. All right, let's have a look at last week's waiver pickups, the 5 players I suggested that you spend a waiver pick on to help your keeper side. And those 5 guys were Nick Madden for GWS. I was very up and about with his debut. This week, wasn't quite as good. He scored a 47, didn't get any kicks. I think he had about 7 handballs. But look, he was okay. And, second game, he was always a chance to drop a poor score. I mean, he shouldn't be on your field. He's not ready for that, but he's just a great stash option because I like the way he started last week. And we get another look at him this week playing Gold Coast. So, yeah, I think we've just got to hope that the Suns decide to give Jared Witts a rest, bring in Ned Moyle and let the 2 young fellas go at it. Otherwise, it's going to be quite a test for young Madden. But if I had picked him up, I'd be pretty happy to hold on to him, even with the poor score on the weekend. I also mentioned Zach Johnson, just that role looked really nice. I think he scored 79 last week, and it did look nice, certainly very nice, and it continued this week with a 104, which I think you'd be stoked with. Tyrell Dewar, he scored a 115. As I said earlier, the role had been there for a few weeks now, but he put it all together on the weekend and put up a really nice score. So hopefully you grabbed him last week. He's going to be very popular this week. Dan Curtin was another I suggested. He scored 72 to make it 4 weeks in a row over 70. And look, he took 6 marks, but 4 of them were contested, which was the equal best on the ground. And for anyone who watched the game, taking marks, contested marks was really hard yakka. It was wet, it was cold, not great conditions. But Curtin keeps doing it, playing on the wing, drifting forward. He's looking the goods. And then the last one was a bit of a Hail Mary, but Tyson Stengel, I just like what the Cats are doing. The Cats forwards are scoring, rather, and, he'd had a good few weeks. He scored 71, kicked 1 goal too. Nothing to get excited about, but certainly not too shabby either. So this week, who are the 5? There's some good ones, I'll tell you that much. Tom McCarthy leads the line. The new West Coast Eagle, number 1 pick in the mid-season draft just a few weeks ago, debuts in a halfback spot, picks up 31 touches. I don't think there's much more I really need to say, except if you're lucky enough to be in a league where no one jumped on him last week, get your pick in for him this week. The next one is Harry Ralston from the Giants. 75 was his score. Looks like he's going to get a bit of a run on the ball. He was a high draft pick. Good, I think good VFL numbers too. Yeah, I think that's one worthy of grabbing for your side. Jackson Binns, I'd have a go at him. Scored the 89 on the wing. I think he looked really good in the role. A really high kick-to-handball ratio. And I think we'll see him keep his spot for a little bit anyway. Jack Martin is a short-term play, but perfect if you're contending for premiership this year. He's got that half-back role at the Cats, and he has forward status. And I guarantee there'd be people in your league who forgot about him, because I don't even think he was traded from Carlton to the Cats. I reckon Carlton delisted him. Cats just picked him up for free. And wouldn't it just be like Geelong to turn him into a gun after, it looked like his career was over. And then the last one, look, Mitch McGovern from Carlton, and he's been on this list, I think, earlier in the year. But I've got him on here for a different reason. It's a different role he's got. I actually like that he's forward now over being a defender and, that intercepting role. And it's funny because usually what you're looking for is a halfback type with forward status. McGovern is playing now at the moment as a half forward, almost like a key forward role, but has defender status. And that actually appeals to me more than I ever thought it would, because I feel like when I look at my teams, I've got plenty of forwards I can trust, young guys to take a punt on. I just feel like my forward line's pretty well filled out. It's my back line in every comp I'm in that is struggling. So even though McGovern is playing forward, I actually think he's going to score all right, and he has defender status, which suits me. So if you're in the same boat I am, I reckon he's someone to target this week. So those 5 names are good, all well and good, but what if you're in a league that is so deep, there's not a chance that any of those guys would even be available? Let's go deeper. I've looked for 5 names that would be possibly available in very deep keeper leagues this week. The first one is Alexander Toru. He is St Kilda's, I think it was their first pick last year, pick 10. And he's getting very close to a debut. There's a good chance by the time you're listening to this podcast, maybe it's already been announced on socials by St Kilda that he's playing, but there's a good chance he's in this week. I reckon we might have seen him earlier in the year, but he copped that big suspension in the VFL. Now, I don't know a lot about him, but I know he's a high draft pick and there's a lot of a good talk about him. So I had a bit of a look into, what sort of player he is. He's tall. He's, I think, just under 200 centimetres maybe. So good in the air, really good interceptor, and I think he can sort of play anywhere. So, yeah, VFL form's good. We might see him this week. There's a chance he's just sitting there for you to pluck him up this week. From a young potential star to a much older player in Luke McDonald. And look, in most leagues I'm in, I probably wouldn't look at him, but in a very deep one, he had back-to-back 70s leading into the weekend, and then he scored 100. And he's looking all right. I noticed him a lot on Saturday night. He was quite involved. So, yeah, worth grabbing him. I think you could field him quite easily in the form he's in anyway. The next one, now hear me out on this guy, but Nat Fyfe is, I don't know, look, in a very, very deep league, he's probably held. But I reckon there's a chance he's floating on waivers. And he's played 2 games now as the sub. So he's played 2 quarters of footy. The last 2 weeks, he's played the last quarter. And he's averaging 21 in those quarters. Has been playing on the ball, centre bounces, and has Essendon this week. And, Geelong midfielders had an absolute picnic against them. So, yeah, I don't know. I reckon he's probably the sub still. But if his fitness gets up and they end up playing him for 4 quarters, pretty handy name to have in your midfield, Nat Fyfe. Isaac Quainer is someone I had a few years ago and was really bullish on. In the end, I had to send him on his way. The scoring just hasn't been there. Before the bye, though, he's just had his bye. His last 3 scores, 100, 74 and 99. And I'm not sure what's pushing this. Maybe, I think Braden Maynard's been out. Maybe there's just been a bit more of a role there for him. But what I do know is when he's playing like that, he's very exciting and has a good fantasy game in him. And the fact that he's just had a bye means he could still be floating around. So he's definitely worth grabbing, see if these scores can continue. And then the last one is Shannon Neal for Geelong. 89 last week, which is, a great score against the Bombers. And I just reckon he might be around because the week before he got injured and his scoring hadn't been good for a while. So there's a good chance someone let him go. And no doubt, he'll get picked up in a deep league, but I'm recommending him because he's got Brisbane this Friday, so that's the perfect loophole option. And the Lions backline struggled, that awful injury to Payne, and then it was the Jesse Hogan, Aaron Cadman show. I think Hipwood, they sent Hipwood back. So anyway, I reckon Neil could have a big one on Friday night, and he's definitely an option. So hopefully there's a name or 2 in there that can help you and you can bring some of those guys in this week. Now, no questions this week. Just got one interesting trade sent through by @HawkersHeroes on X, who's a great supporter of the show. Thanks for your trade that you sent through, Hawker. Love your work, mate. So it was a trade that was done in January this year in a league, and it was an interesting pick swap. So let's have a look at it. He sent me through a screenshot with the picks, but in brackets it's got who the teams used those picks on, which is such an awesome feature on Keeper Fantasy, where it has the retrospective trading history. So pick 2 for pick 19, and then in brackets it's got the name of who was taken at the draft. Awesome. Love it. So let's look at the picks, and then I'll look at the players they got, and then we'll sort of wrap it at the end there. So side A got pick 2, pick 110, pick 115, and a 10th round future pick. The other side got pick 19, pick 20, pick 25, and next year's first round pick. Now, for extra context, the side that brought in pick 2 already had pick 1. So they've got picks 2, 110, 115, and then a 10th rounder, giving up picks 19, 20, 25, and next year's first round. All right, let's have a look at who they got. Pick 2, Jagger Smith. So obviously grabbed Ashcroft with 1, you'd think. Pick 110, Ryan Burton. That's looked pretty good. And pick 115, Mark Blitzarves. Pretty good. The other side, pick 19, took Toby Green. Pick 20, Brad Hill. And then pick 25, Jack Crisp. I reckon just looking at that, it's a pretty clear win for the side that got pick 2. Now, I know Jagger Smith obviously out for the year. Wasn't to know that when this draft took place. But what I like about this is, you know, he or she has given up some really nice picks there. We got 19, 20, 25, and next year's first. I mean, that's the big one, next year's first. But if you look at the players that got brought in with those picks, Toby Green, I mean, he's been excellent this year. The last few weeks, not so much, but yeah, he's been great. Brad Hill's actually been really good as well, fairly consistent, and Crisp has been pretty decent too. So look, they're really good names, and you know, in terms of points on field, they've been very helpful. But I'm guessing the side that already had pick 1 isn't too worried about points on field. But what I like is with picks 110 and 115, I mean, Ryan Burton's been pretty good this year, and Blitzar's been handy as well. So, you know, there's not a huge difference in the quality of players, and that's, you know, 80, 90 picks difference in the draft. And then, you know, he's got Jagger Smith locked away for next year, which I think, you know, giving up your future first round is a big deal. But if it's essentially to get Jagger Smith that, you know, we're all pretty certain on, certainly before the injury, you know, is just trying to accelerate that rebuild by getting Ashcroft and Smith in instead of Ashcroft now, and then next year's best player in the draft. I don't think the other coaches lost that much. I mean, the players, Green, Hill and Crisp, potentially have helped that side on the way to, you know, premiership glory this year. But Jagger Smith, you know, that's going to be one that is going to be a hard watch in the future, knowing that you let him go. But really good trading from both sides, and a keeper league with active trades like this is a really good, healthy keeper league. So you love to see it. Thanks for sending it through, Hawker. I love that stuff. And before I finish, I'll just touch on a trade that I pulled off in my home league. So I'm contending at the pointy end of the ladder, and I had Luke Traynor, who I grabbed earlier this year after some good scores. And I've just traded him for Riley Bice. And the reason is, you know, I didn't want to let Traynor go, but I just feel like he's, you know, potentially a few years away from being reliable on field. Like, I can't play him on field at the moment. Not when he's being subbed every other week and played forward, and it's just not reliable. So I love him as a prospect, but I need defenders scoring now because I just don't have many good ones. And I think what Bice did before the bye was pretty promising. Pretty promising that he can be a pretty reliable scorer, and then, who knows where he can turn into in the future. So I think it was a good trade. I think both sides are pretty happy. Guy I traded with is a big Richmond fan, so obviously good to see Trainer fall to a Tigers fan. And I think it was a good trade. The funny thing about the trade, though, is we actually both grabbed these players as waiver picks the same round. And I really wanted Bice, but missed out and got Trainer. And I think he wanted Trainer the whole time as well. So anyway, it works out. I've got Bice, he's got Trainer. Hopefully Bice can get on field, score me some 80s and help my push towards a premiership. All going well. And that's it for the list of questions this week. Thanks, Hawker, for sending them through. Don't forget, guys, send them through to me. Give me some trades to talk about. Could even be a trade that you're just considering. Sending an offer to someone in your league and you're not sure if it's the right call. Send it through to me and I'll read it out in the pod and give you my honest thoughts. But that's it for this week's episode of Finders Keepers. On this, the 20th episode. And I certainly hope you're enjoying the podcast so far this season. If you are, make sure you've liked and subscribed wherever you're listening to it. And as I said earlier, find the page on X at FindKeepAFL and stay up to date with all the latest on the podcast. I'll be back next week to look at round 15. And I want to start looking at the strategy around trading in keeper leagues at this time of the year especially, because I know there'd be a lot of leagues who have trade deadlines approaching, and there'd be a lot of coaches trying to work out what to do with players who may be absolutely at top career value but may be of no use to you if your season's already tanked. So what do you do with them? What's the value of them? I might start looking at some of those questions and help you with, some potentially big decisions that may be coming up for you and your list. So tune in for that, and of course everything else as I go through round 15 of the AFL season. Look forward to bringing it to you next week. In the meantime, for the 20th time, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers, and until next time, keep on keeping on.